My name doesn't matter for what I'm about to tell you, but my role does. For 11 years, I worked as an evidence review technician for a regional prosecution support office in the north of the country. I am not a detective. I am not a forensic analyst. I am a clerk who watches things other people have already watched and writes down what they missed. And in my 9th year on the job, I was given a case where the only thing I was allowed to write down was what wasn't there. A sealed packet, 6 hard drives, 1 empty chair, and a camera that kept skipping over it again and again for 4 months in a building that had been demolished before I was born. I want to say plainly before any of the rest of it that I am not someone who believes in things. I don't read horoscopes. I don't keep a lucky pen. When a colleague once told me the 3rd-floor toilets were haunted because the motion sensor lights kept turning themselves on, I helped him find the faulty relay in the ceiling void, and that was the end of his ghost. I mention this because I want you to understand that the way I describe the next part is not the way I would have described it before. I have had to change the way I talk about empty rooms. The work itself was quieter than people imagine. Most days I sat in a small room with 2 monitors, a pair of over-ear headphones with cracked padding, and a request slip telling me which evidence packet to pull from the secure archive across the corridor. I would sign the chain of custody log, carry the packet back to my desk, and work through it frame by frame, noting timestamps, gaps, audio anomalies, anything a junior officer might have glossed over because they were working 12 cases at once and we were working 1. The job paid badly. It suited me. I've always preferred problems that hold still long enough to be looked at properly. The case in question came to my desk in the autumn of my 9th year. It was flagged as sealed, which in our system means restricted distribution rather than physically locked. Sealed cases were unusual but not rare. They tended to involve minors, ongoing investigations into people who hadn't yet been charged, or matters where a senior officer had decided the file should not circulate through the usual channels. To review a sealed packet, you needed a specific authorization number on your request slip, signed by someone 2 grades above mine. The slip on my desk that morning had the authorization number. It had the right signature. It also had no case reference, only an internal tracking code I didn't recognize, and a single line in the subject field that read, "Review for unaccounted intervals. Note only what is missing." That phrasing was strange. Our standard instruction is to note everything. What is there, what is missing, what is inconsistent, and what is procedural. To be told to note only what is missing was, in practical terms, to be told to ignore most of what I would normally write down. I assumed at first it was a shorthand from a supervisor who was in a hurry. I signed for the packet, brought it back to my desk, and opened it. There were 6 hard drives inside, each labeled with a date range covering roughly 4 months of continuous CCTV footage from a single location. The location was identified only as Site 7. There was no address, no floor plan, no witness statements, no incident summary, no charge sheet. There was nothing in the packet that told me what crime, if any, had occurred. There was only the footage and the instruction. I started with the earliest drive. The footage was from a single fixed camera, mounted high on a wall, looking down into what appeared to be a small waiting area. The picture was grey and slightly washed out, the way older internal cameras tend to be. The frame showed a section of pale linoleum floor, a low table with nothing on it, a notice board whose contents were too far away to read, and 4 chairs arranged against the far wall. 3 of the chairs were the kind you see in any council building. Plastic seats on metal frames, bolted together in a row of 3. The 4th chair stood apart, to the left of the row, separated by perhaps a meter of empty floor. It was a different style. Wooden, high-backed. The kind of chair you might find in an older office. The sort of thing that ends up in a corner because nobody wants to throw it out, but nobody wants to sit in it either. I made a note of the layout, as I would for any review. Then I started the timeline. For the first hour of footage, nothing happened. This is normal. Most CCTV is nothing happening. People came and went occasionally through the bottom of the frame, never quite entering the seating area, never sitting down. I logged the entries and exits by timestamp, more out of habit than instruction, and at the 47-minute mark, I noticed the first skip. It was very small. The timestamp in the corner of the frame jumped from 09:47:13 to 09:47:19. 6 seconds. The light in the room was unchanged. The position of the chairs was unchanged. There was no visible cut, no compression artifact, no frame stutter. It was the kind of skip that you would normally attribute to a write error on the recording device, and ordinarily I would have flagged it as a technical note and moved on. I almost did. What stopped me was the wooden chair. In the frame before the skip, the chair sat as it had since I started watching, slightly angled toward the row of plastic seats. In the frame after the skip, the chair was in exactly the same position. Nothing had moved, and yet I had the distinct, immediate sense that something had been on it during the missing 6 seconds and was no longer there. I don't know how to explain that sense, except to say that the empty chair after the skip looked emptier than the empty chair before it, as if it had just been vacated. I made a note. Timestamp jump. 9:47:13:2:09:47:19. No frame transition visible. Subject chair unoccupied before and after. I underlined the word subject without thinking, then crossed it out, because there was no subject. There was a chair. The next skip came at 11:14, 11 seconds this time. Same chair, same impression. By the end of the first drive, I had logged 14 skips, ranging from 3 seconds to just over a minute, all of them centered on or near that wooden chair. The rest of the footage was uninterrupted. People moved through the bottom of the frame. Lights changed as the day progressed. Shadows lengthened and shortened. Only the chair seemed to require these small absences in the record. I want to be honest about what I thought at this point. I thought the drive was damaged. I thought maybe the camera had a bad sector, or the recorder had a fault that triggered on movement in a specific zone of the image. I noted the skips, wrote a recommendation that the original device be examined for hardware issues, and moved on to the second drive. The second drive was from the same camera, the next month of footage. The skips continued. They were not at regular intervals. They did not correspond to shift changes or daylight hours or any pattern I could identify on a first pass. But they all happened around the chair, and they all had the same quality, which is that nothing visibly changed across them, and yet something felt on the far side to have ended. I worked through all 6 drives over the next 3 weeks. By the end, I had logged just under 900 skips. The shortest was 2 seconds. The longest was 3 minutes and 40 seconds. In all of them, the chair was empty before and after. In none of them did the rest of the room show any sign of disturbance. If you had taken any single frame from across the 4 months of footage and shown it to me, I would have told you the room was unoccupied and the chair was unused. But I had started, by then, to notice something else. Around the chair, in the linoleum floor, there was a faint discoloration, a roughly oval patch, slightly darker than the surrounding surface, the kind of stain you get when something has stood in one place for a very long time, and slowly leached into the material below it. In the earliest footage, the stain was small, perhaps the size of a dinner plate. By the final drive, 4 months later, it had grown to roughly the dimensions of a person's feet, planted shoulder-width apart, with a thinner trail extending back toward the chair itself. The stain had developed across footage in which, according to the visible record, nobody had ever sat in the chair. I went back and checked. I checked carefully. I sampled 50 random hours of footage from across the 4 months and watched them at quarter speed, eyes on the chair. The chair was always empty. The floor in front of it was always empty, and the stain grew anyway. That was the point at which I stopped trusting the instruction on my request slip. Note only what is missing. I had been reading it as a shorthand. I started reading it as a warning. I took my logs to my supervisor. Her name was Diane, and she had been in the office longer than anyone, including the people who managed her. She had the kind of desk that suggested she had stopped expecting promotions some time ago and had made peace with it. I asked her, without showing her the footage, whether she had ever come across a case where the instruction was to note only absences. She looked at me for a long moment over the rim of her mug. "Site 7, she said. I hadn't told her the site number. She didn't ask me how the review was going. She didn't ask what I'd found. She said, very quietly, that there were a few things I should know if I was going to keep working on it, and that she would prefer to tell me in the corridor rather than at her desk. We went out through the fire door into the small concrete yard where people used to smoke before the building went non-smoking, and she told me 3 things. The first was that Site 7 was not a current location, The camera that had produced the footage had been decommissioned, along with the rest of the site, more than 20 years before I started at the office. The building it had been mounted in had been demolished. The footage on those drives, she said, had been recorded after the demolition. She did not explain how. She told me not to ask. The second was that there was an internal protocol for handling Site 7 packets, and it was not written down anywhere I would be able to find. The protocol had 3 parts. You did not watch the footage in real time if you could avoid it. You scrubbed through it at high speed, pausing only on timestamps you had reason to investigate. You did not, under any circumstances, watch the same skip more than twice. And you did not, ever, narrate what you were watching out loud. Not even to yourself. Not even in an empty room. The third was that the technician who had reviewed the previous Site 7 packet had been a man called Ellis. He had worked at the office for 19 years, and he had taken early retirement 3 months before my request slip appeared on my desk. Diane did not know where he had gone. She said that when she had last seen him, in the corridor on his final day, he had been carrying a cardboard box of personal effects, and he had not turned his head when she said goodbye. She said he had been looking at a point about a meter to the left of her, as if there were someone standing there she could not see, and that he had kept looking at that point the entire time she spoke to him. And when he walked away, he had walked in a slight curve, as if going around something. I asked her why she was telling me this. She said because the packet had come to my desk, and the packet only came to desks for a reason, and she did not believe in the reasons, but she had stopped pretending the reasons did not exist. I went back to my room. I did not watch any footage for the rest of that day. I sat at my desk, and I read through my own logs, the 900 skips, and I tried to find a pattern in them that I had missed. I found one almost immediately, now that I was looking for it. The skips were getting longer, not in a smooth curve, but in a general trend, with a slight acceleration in the final weeks of the recorded period. If you plotted them on a graph, which I did on a piece of scrap paper, the line rose unevenly but unmistakably toward the right-hand edge of the page. Whatever the chair was doing, it was doing more of it as time went on. I also noticed, going back through my notes, that I had described several of the skips as feeling like the chair had just been vacated. I had used that word 11 times. I had also used the word occupied 9 times, in phrases like the chair appears recently occupied, or the area around the chair shows signs of occupation. I did not remember writing those phrases. They were in my handwriting. They were in the right pen. The notebook had not left my desk. I want to be clear that I am not the kind of person who forgets what he has written. I keep meticulous notes. It is the only thing I am good at. The idea that I had written 11 separate observations about a chair being vacated, in a footage stream where the chair was visibly empty the entire time, and had no memory of doing so, was the first thing in this whole sequence that frightened me in a way I could feel in my body. That night I did not sleep well. I kept turning the rules over in my head. Do not watch in real time. Do not watch the same skip more than twice. Do not narrate out loud. They were practical rules. They were the kind of rules an office develops when something has gone wrong enough times that a process has been built around it. They were also the kind of rules that only exist because someone, at some point, broke them and learned what happened next. I broke the second rule the next morning. I didn't mean to. I had pulled up a skip from the 3rd drive, one of the longer ones, around 2.5 minutes, and I was watching it at normal speed because I wanted to see whether the light in the room changed across the gap. It didn't. I watched it again to confirm. Then, without thinking, because I wanted to be sure, I watched it a 3rd time. On the 3rd viewing, the chair was not empty. I want to describe this carefully, because I have thought about it a great deal, and I am still not certain what I saw. The image on screen was the same image I had watched twice already, the same timestamp, the same room, the same floor, the same row of plastic chairs, but now, in the wooden chair to the left, there was a figure. It was seated. It was facing the camera. I could not see its features, because the resolution of the footage was too low, and the lighting in the room was too flat, but I could see its outline very clearly. A person, of roughly average build, sitting with their hands resting on their knees, their feet planted on the discolored patch of linoleum, their head tilted very slightly to one side, as if listening. It did not move. For 2 minutes and 40 seconds it sat there, and the timestamp in the corner of the frame advanced normally, and the figure did not move once. Not a breath, not a twitch. At the end of the skip, the figure was gone, and the chair was empty, and the next frame of footage continued as if nothing had been there. I stopped the playback. I sat in my chair. I did not narrate what I had seen out loud. I remembered that rule, at least. And then, against everything I had been told, I went back to the start of the same skip, and I watched it a fourth time, because I had to know whether the figure was there on the fourth viewing too, or whether the third had been a fluke, a moment of tiredness, a trick of the screen. The figure was there. It was in the same position, but its head was tilted slightly more. And now it was tilted toward the camera. Toward me. I closed the file. I did not watch it a fifth time. For the next week, I worked only on other cases. I told Diane I needed a break from Site 7, and she did not argue. I caught up on a backlog of minor evidence reviews, a traffic incident, a shoplifting case, a workplace assault. I drank bad coffee, I slept badly, I made a point of not thinking about the chair, which is a thing you cannot make a point of doing without, in fact, thinking about it constantly. In the second week, two things happened. The first was that I received a follow-up request slip on my desk, asking me to complete the Site 7 review by the end of the month. The signature on the slip was the same as the original. The authorization number was the same. The subject line was different. It read, "Final pass. Note only what is no longer missing." I read that sentence several times. Note only what is no longer missing. I tried to understand it as a typo or a clerical error, or a rephrasing of the original instruction. It would not resolve into any of those things. The instruction was asking me to note the things that had previously been absent and were now present. The second thing was that I came in early one morning, before the rest of the office, and I found my chair pulled out from my desk. Not pushed in the way I always left it. Pulled out at an angle, as if someone had been sitting in it and stood up in a hurry. There was nothing else disturbed. My monitors were off. My notebook was closed where I had left it. The room was locked when I arrived, and the access log, which I checked immediately, showed no entries after my own departure the previous evening. I sat down in my chair. It was warm. I want to be careful here. Office chairs in a building with central heating can feel warm for a number of reasons. The radiator was near my desk. The morning sun came through the window at a certain angle. I'm not telling you the chair was warm because someone had been sitting in it. I'm telling you the chair was warm, and I noticed, and I wrote it down, and I underlined it, and then I crossed out the underline because I did not want to be the kind of person who underlined things like that. I went back to the Site 7 footage that afternoon. I had decided by then that I was going to finish the review, because the alternative was to leave the packet open on someone else's desk, and I did not want to be the person who handed it on the way Ellis had handed it to me. I also wanted, although I did not admit this to myself at the time, to know what no longer missing meant. I started with the final drive, the last month of footage, where the skips were longest and the stain on the floor was widest. I worked backward from the most recent timestamps. I scrubbed at high speed, the way Diane had told me, pausing only when I had to. I tried not to watch any single skip more than twice. In the second hour of that final drive, I found the frame. It was during one of the longer skips, almost 3 minutes. I had paused the playback near the middle of the gap, intending to log the timestamp and move on. The frame on screen showed the room as I'd come to know it. The linoleum, the row of plastic chairs, the notice board, the wooden chair to the left. The stain was at its widest here, a dark oval extending almost to the legs of the nearest plastic chair. In the wooden chair, there was a figure, the same figure, seated, hands on knees, feet planted on the stain. Its head was tilted toward the camera. That was not what stopped me. What stopped me was that at the bottom of the frame, in the part of the floor closest to the camera, where people occasionally passed through on their way to wherever the rest of the building led, there was a second figure. This one was standing. Its back was to the camera. It was facing the wooden chair. It was wearing what looked like an office shirt and dark trousers, and it was holding in its left hand a notebook. I do not own many notebooks. I use one at a time until it is full, and then I put it in a drawer and start a new one. The notebook in the figure's hand was the same size and color as the one open on my desk at that moment. I could see, even at the poor resolution of the footage, the small white sticker on the front cover where I write the date range of each book. I could not read the date on the sticker. I did not need to. The figure in the chair was looking past the standing figure directly at the camera, directly at me. I did not watch the skip a second time. I closed the file. I sat at my desk, and I looked at my notebook, and I looked at my hands, and I tried to work out which of the two figures in the frame I was supposed to be. I want to tell you that I stopped the review there. I want to tell you that I took the drives back to the archive, signed them in, wrote a report recommending the case be reassigned to a more senior reviewer, and went home. I did do those things, eventually, but not before I did one more thing, which I am still not sure was a decision I made, or a decision that was made through me. I went back to the first drive, the earliest footage, the very beginning of the 4-month recording period. I scrubbed to the first skip I had logged, the 6-second jump at 09:47. I paused the playback 1 second before the skip began. I looked at the wooden chair. It was empty. I looked at the floor in front of it. The stain was small, the size of a dinner plate. I looked at the bottom of the frame. There was no standing figure. The floor was clear. The room was as I had first described it, 4 months earlier in the footage, decades earlier in the world. I advanced the playback 1 frame. The skip began. The timestamp jumped. I advanced again. The skip ended. In the frame after the skip, at the bottom of the image, there was a single fresh mark on the linoleum. A small dark smudge, roughly the shape of the sole of a shoe, pointing toward the wooden chair. It had not been there in the frame before. It was there now. And from that smudge, very faintly, a second mark led away, and a third, in a slow, uneven line that disappeared off the bottom of the frame, in the direction of the camera. The footsteps were leaving. I closed the file. I packed up the drives. I signed them back into the archive. I wrote my report. I recommended reassignment. I told Diane in the corridor that I was finished with Site 7 and would not be available if a further packet arrived. She nodded and did not look surprised. She said she would note it on the internal record. She did not ask what I had seen. I worked at the office for 2 more years after that. The Site 7 packet did not come back to my desk. I do not know who reviewed the final pass, or whether anyone did, or whether the instructions simply waited on a shelf somewhere for a clerk whose name had not yet been chosen. I left the job for unrelated reasons, or reasons I have chosen to call unrelated, and I now do something else, in a different part of the country, in a building with no archive and no review rooms and no chairs that I did not buy myself. But the thing about reviewing footage for a living is that you learn to look at rooms a certain way. You learn to notice what stains a floor. You learn to notice when a chair is sitting at the wrong angle, and you cannot unlearn it. Not when you go home, not when you stop working, not ever. The discoloration on my own kitchen floor, in front of the chair where I sit to drink my coffee in the mornings, has been growing for some time. It is roughly oval. It is slightly darker than the surrounding surface. It is approximately the dimensions of a person's feet, planted shoulder-width apart. I have cleaned it. I have replaced the lino. The new lino has begun to darken in the same pattern, in the same place, at what I would estimate to be a slightly faster rate than the old one. 2 weeks ago, I came down the stairs in the morning, and I found my kitchen chair pulled out from the table, not pushed in, the way I always leave it. Pulled out at an angle, as if someone had been sitting in it and stood up in a hurry. The front door was locked. The windows were locked. The chair was warm. I have stopped sitting in it. I eat standing up now at the counter with my back to the room. I do not look at the chair. I do not narrate what I am doing out loud, not even to myself, not even when the house is empty, which I am no longer certain it is. Last night, after I turned off the kitchen light and went upstairs, I heard, from the room below me, the very soft sound of a chair being pulled out from a table. And then, after a pause of perhaps 2 or 3 seconds, the sound of someone sitting down. The chair is still there this morning. It is empty. The stain on the floor in front of it is a little wider than it was yesterday. I was told a long time ago to note only what is missing, and then, later, to note only what is no longer missing. I have not yet been given the 3rd instruction, But the chair is waiting. The floor is darkening. And somewhere in an archive I no longer have access to, on a drive that should not exist, in a building that was demolished decades before I ever started this job, a camera is still recording an empty room. And the skips are getting longer.